Hello and welcome to the latest in our series of video lectures and lessons on Irish history. Now, today we're starting off on one of the most famous events, not just in Irish history, but in history, or for anyone who knows anything about Ireland, they've probably heard about the Easter Rising. Now, we're going to look at why that's significant, and we're going to look at it under a number of ways. So, what was the background to the 1916 Rising? What were the main events of the 1916 Rising itself? Why did the Rising fail? What were the effects of the rising, and why did support for Sinn Féin increase? And mostly, why is something that was such a tremendous failure celebrated and revered by Ireland and Irish people all these years later? Let's take a deep dive into it, shall we? So, first of all, we have to look at the background to the 1916 Rising. In August 1914, World War One had begun, as we had mentioned in our last video, and Home Rule was postponed until the war ended. Thousands of Ulster Unionists joined the British Army to show their loyalty to the King. At Woodenbridge, in County Wicklow, John Redmond, the Home Rule leader, asked the Irish Volunteers to join the British Army. He hoped this would influence the negotiations for Home Rule after the war. This speech caused a split in the volunteers. 170,000 volunteers agreed with Redmond, and they were known as the National Volunteers. However, a vocal minority of 11,000 volunteers disagreed, and they were led by Owen MacNeill. They kept the name the Irish Volunteers as they wanted to stay in Ireland to ensure that the British government would not break its practice of granting and promising home rule. England's difficulty is Ireland's opportunity became the slogan at the time. As Britain's attention was forced into fighting on the Western Front, the IRB, the Irish Republican Brotherhood, saw this as an opportunity to win independence for Ireland. Now, the Western Front were trenches in France that stretched from the English Channel to the Swiss border, just to give you the size of the war that the British were fighting. A military council was set up in 1915 to plan the rising. Its members included Padraig Pearse, Thomas Clarke, and Joseph Plunkett. So you had around 30,000 national volunteers join the British Army. Another 30,000 Ulster volunteers would form the 36th Ulster Division in the British Army. Now, James Connolly was invited to join the council when the IRB also discovered that he was planning a rebellion with the Irish Citizen Army. He wanted to set up that socialist republic that we saw and mentioned earlier in Ireland. Now, a couple of guys to look at here, we have Padraig Pearse, Thomas Clarke, Joseph Mary Plunkett, and James Connolly. Now, another important man that we have here is Roger Casement in Germany. So, Roger Casement went to Germany to get support and buy guns. It figured that because England's difficulty was in Ireland's opportunity, anything that would be seen to weaken Britain, Germany would be in favour of. So, he went to Germany to seek the support for this rebellion. The rising was planned for Sunday, the 23rd of April, 1916. However, the weapons were to arrive off the coast of Kerry. Unfortunately, the ship, which was called the Aud, which was carrying the arms, was captured by the British Army. Now, the IRB only had a few hundred members. Therefore, it needed the support of the 11,000 Irish volunteers to have any chance of a successful rebellion. But for it to have a successful rebellion, also you need the weapons, and the weapons are now captured 2 days beforehand. So, the IRB controlled most of the leading positions in the Irish Volunteers, which was unknown to its leader, Owen MacNeill. Joseph Plunkett forged a document called the Castle Document, which had all the official lettered typehead and font from Dublin Castle, which was the seat of power in Ireland, and it stated that the government was going to arrest the leaders of the volunteers. MacNeill told the volunteers to get ready to resist. Now, MacNeill found out on Easter Sunday, though, that the Aud had been captured. He discovered that the Castle document was a forgery, so he cancelled plans for fighting. The order was published in the Sunday papers, and this ended any hope of a countrywide rising, and therefore dooming the rising itself. The problem is, though, despite Owen MacNeill cancelling it, the rest of the rising leaders met on Easter Sunday and knew they couldn't succeed. The fact that they didn't have enough weapons and they were confined to Dublin, they were screwed. But they still went ahead with it because they believed in this idea of blood sacrifice. Blood sacrifice means that the deaths and the spilling of the blood would inspire the Irish to fight for independence. So therefore that they become martyrs and they become bigger than any one issue. Now to the week of the rising itself. They decided that the rebellion would start the next day, which was Easter Monday, the 24th of April 1916. The volunteers and the ICA, which numbered about 1,500 in total, seized key buildings around Dublin, including the GPO, the Four Courts, Boland's Mills, and the Royal College of Surgeons. But if we look at the map, that's in quite a narrow area, and you're surrounding yourself, and there is still the issue of the Liffey. Now, Padraig Pearse also made the GPO the headquarters of the rising. Pearse read the proclamation of the Irish Republic outside the GPO to puzzled onlookers. It was signed by the 7 members of the Military Council: Thomas J. Clarke, Sean McDermott, Tomas McDonough, P.H. Pearse, Eamon Kent, James Connolly, and Joseph Plunkett. The British were caught by surprise. However, there were 6,000 British soldiers in the city by Tuesday. On Wednesday, you have the gunship, the Helga, sailing up the River Liffey, and it shelled Liberty Hall. The GPO was shelled by guns in Trinity College. Okay, so what that meant was that by Friday, Pearse had ordered the soldiers to evacuate the GPO because if it was on fire. They moved to houses in Moore Street, not far from the GPO, and on the Saturday, Pearse ordered the volunteers to surrender. The rebellion was over. Now, the question is, why did the rising fail? Now, there was no countrywide rebellion, which meant that the British could concentrate their forces solely on Dublin. The decision to take over the key buildings in the centre of Dublin made it easy for the British to surround them. It was bad tactics. The rebels were heavily outnumbered by the British forces, whose soldiers were more experienced and, quite frankly, better armed. And the effects of the rising: so around 3,000 people were arrested. Now remember, there's only about 1,500 fighting, so you had another 1,500 at least wrongly arrested and accused. 90 people were sentenced to death by secret military courts between the 3rd and the 12th of May. 14 of the leaders were executed in Kilmaine and Gael. All the signatories of the proclamation were shot. As the executions were carried out over those 10 days, public opinion began to change. And why did it change? Well, you see, during the rising and immediately after it, people were angry at the rebels. This was due to the damage caused to the city and the loss of earnings of many workers. However, the executions, especially that of the wounded Connolly, caused people to sympathise with the rebels. Also, 2,000 people were imprisoned, most of whom were innocent. And this was internment, this was imprisonment without trial. This increased the public sympathy. The British soon recognised the need and the change in public opinion and stopped the executions. Those who were sent to these internment camps were released within a year, but they had been radicalised because they were exposed to Republicans. They were pissed off, they were annoyed. And this is why there's all of a sudden more support for the rebels. However, the damage was done, and historians now see this as the key turning point and moment in Irish history. Most people no longer wanted home rule, but now demanded total independence of Britain. In other words, an Irish Republic. So, this also led to the growth of Sinn Féin. Now, Sinn Féin was set up in 1905, and what they wanted was a dual monarchy. So, contrary to what we know about Sinn Féin today and what we know about Sinn Féin in the 60s, 70s and 80s, Sinn Féin had based itself off Austria and Hungary. They wanted Ireland and England to be two separate countries, united by the same king. This is what happened and their goal when Arthur Griffiths set them up in 1905. They were a dual monarchist party. He wanted to win more independence than Home Rule would give, and he hoped to achieve this by the peaceful means. By the 1916 Rising, though, Sinn Féin had very few supporters, but as a party to benefit most from the change in public opinion after the Rising. The British had wrongly called it the Sinn Féin Rebellion. In fact, Sinn Féin didn't take part in the Rising at all, but it was the association with the name being As Gaeilge is why they were blamed for it. Home Rule was no longer seen as enough by most nationalists. In 1917, nationalists who favoured complete independence in Britain joined Sinn Féin. The party was also strengthened by the release of those interned in Britain, especially Michael Collins and Eamon de Valera. So, Michael Collins was from County Cork. He fought in the GPO during the Rising. When he was released, he used his organisational ability to build up Sinn Féin and the volunteers. So, de Valera becomes leader, and he changes the aims of Sinn Féin. The aims simply was to set up a republic completely independent of Britain, and to set up a parliament in Dublin called the Dáil, independent of Westminster. The Dáil would elect the government and set up an alternative administration to the British one. Support for Sinn Féin itself was boosted by events in 1917 and 1918. The British announced plans to introduce conscription into Ireland. All Irish parties opposed this plan, but Sinn Féin got most of the credit when the British dropped the plan. The British arrested Sinn Féin leaders such as de Valera and Griffith. This again would increase support for Sinn Féin. And Sinn Féin then won 4 by-elections in 1918. And a by-election is when an MP dies or retires, then another election is held to replace him. So here's our key figures. Now, the 1918 general election is another key turning point. When this was called after World War I in November 1918, this was the first election for 10 years, and the change in the franchise, or in other words, voting rules, meant a lot of young men and women over 30 were now voting for the first time. This favoured Sinn Féin as it was seen as a young and a dynamic party. The Home Rule Party was seen as old and tired and stale and out of touch. The results of the 1918 general election were dramatic. Sinn Féin won 73 seats, whereas the Home Rule Party only won 6. Now Sinn Féin was the voice of Nationalist Ireland. The Unionist Party won 26 seats and would have a major say in future events in Ireland, and this would lead to the War of Independence for our next video. Thanks for listening. I'll be back again with another video real soon. Take care. Goodbye.